Hey, what's up guys? This is Jay from Crown Bees, and today I get the chance to talk to you about mason bees. So when I say the word pollinator, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I bet you thought honeybee. Well, you may be surprised to know that in North America alone, there's over 4,500 species of bees besides the honeybee. Pretty cool, huh? So today we're going to talk about one of them. It's called the mason bee. A mason bee is a solitary bee. Now what does that mean? Well, a solitary bee will go out in the field, grab that pollen, grab that nectar, and bring it back for their own offspring, that one egg that mason bee just laid. The mason bee's hive or house is literally the size of this little native reed. Pretty cool. Now this is different than a social bee, which is like what a honeybee is. And a social bee lives in a structure where there's 100,000 potential bees in the hive. There's one queen. There's about, up to 80,000 workers, which are females, and maybe 20,000 drones, which are males. Totally different system. They all work for the greater good of that colony. Well, in this situation where there's a mason bee, she's literally working for her very own egg, and that's it. Well, why is that important? Well, mason bees pollinate really, really well. They're very dedicated and determined pollinators. That means if you have a backyard garden or you're a farmer with a great crop that you need to pollinate as fast as you can, a mason bee does a really good job. Now, why haven't you heard much about mason bees? Well, guess what? Mason bees don't make any honey. They are great pollinators, so they make a lot of fruit and vegetables, but they don't necessarily make as much honey or any honey at all. And so some people aren't as interested in them. But guess what? I don't care that they don't make any honey. You know why? Because they are amazing pollinators. And I know that if I put mason bees on a certain type of crop, or I put them in my backyard, I'm going to have a ton of fruit and vegetables that are just as good, if not better, than a bunch of honey. So I love mason bees. So what's cool about mason bees is they really don't care what their house looks like. They just want something safe and easy. You can have a house like this. You can have a house like this with like a PVC tube with a bunch of reeds inside. You can take these reeds and you can literally just throw a rubber band around them, stick them inside of a 2-liter Coke bottle, mount it to the side of your fence, and guess what? You're in business. Pretty cool. So how did the mason bee get its name? Well, it uses mud. And mud is what it uses to separate out all the different chambers inside this reed where she will lay an egg. So she lays an egg, she deposits a little bit of pollen, a little bit of nectar for that egg, and then seals off a chamber with a little bit of mud and does it again. And she'll fill up the entire length of this reed and then cap it off with a little mud on the end. So mason bees are all around our backyards and our countrysides. We just don't really know it. You want to know why? Because they're a lot quieter. They don't have the same type of sound that a honeybee does. They don't sting. Female mason bees do have stingers, but it's extremely rare to ever get stung by a mason bee. And if you did get stung, it just kind of feels like a pinch. So it's no big deal at all. They don't cause anaphylactic shock or any major allergies like honeybees do. And again, they sort of look a little bit different. They're fuzzier on top and on bottom. They don't really carry pollen the same way as a honeybee does. Mason bees carry it along their bellies. And what's really cool about that is that they carry a lot of pollen and then they actually drop off a lot of pollen by accident and they got to pick it up again. Why is that important? Well, if you're a farmer or even a backyard gardener and you want to cross-pollinate your crops, in other words, you want to bring some pollen from one area and bring it on to another, a mason bee is your perfect vehicle to do that. They'll grab a bunch of pollen, they'll land on the next flower, drop a bunch off, pick it up again, go to another flower, and do it all over again. And so you get a big, big boost to your crops and your production, which is really, really awesome. So another thing I love about mason bees is that how we store them is super convenient. So we grow our mason bees inside these trays, and at the end of the season, we will harvest the mason bees out of there, we'll stick them in a little tub like this, and put them in the fridge, believe it or not. And why do we do that? Well, when you put them in the fridge, you sort of shut them down and you cool them down so that when my farmer calls me or you find out that your backyard is ready to bloom or it is blooming and it's time to pollinate them, all you got to do is pull these out of the fridge, set them out in your backyard, and all those mason bees will hatch out right when you need them. So that's the basics of mason bees. Mason bees are a solitary bee that you can raise in anything you want, any sort of house or structure. They live in a small reed. They gather pollen and nectar and deposit it inside of the chambers of that reed for their own offspring. They separate the cocoon chambers with a little bit of mud. They seal off the end of the reed with a little bit of mud. And they're quiet. They don't really sting. And they're amazing pollinators that don't make any honey. Clear as mud? Okay. Well, next let's talk about how and when to successfully raise our mason bees.